I titled this talk, Less Past, More Presence, because this summer I really wanted less past, more present. I had the opportunity to take a pretty long road trip with my family from here, making our way back to Chicago, where I grew up. And I haven't lived there in decades, still have family and friends there. And so I had a high school reunion, a family reunion, and a wedding. And so something strange happened as we kind of drove across the country. As my husband said, the closer we got to Chicago, the worse mood I got in. And he said I physically would start to contract. Because I have so many mixed feelings about growing up there, working there, going to school there. And even though there were some pleasant things that happened there, I met my husband there. It just was a big pile of bad memories for me. And as we drove through the city, it was he always would say I couldn't even stop myself if I tried. Every corner, literally every corner we would pass. Oh, that was that awful apartment. Oh, that's where my car got broken into. That's where that guy broke up with me. Oh, that bar, that was the worst gig of my life. Just on and on. I mean, it was dukkha. It was suffering big time. And it was like, I couldn't shake it. It was like I'd get to Chicago and there'd be this old coat that I just couldn't get rid of. And thinking that I had for sure had left these memories behind, decades earlier when I left. And so he finally said, this time we're with our teenage daughter, and I was trying to model a different way of experiencing my past. And he said, you got to break up with your past. You just got to break up with it. And I thought, that's kind of, I would love to, but like old boyfriends that break up with you, on certain Chicago street corners, when you're there, it just comes flooding all back. So I thought, well, the difference now is I have these years of mindfulness meditation practice. I'm really going to try to experience this in a new way. And especially since there were plenty of great things that happened there, but the memory, the process at work was really, really making me suffer. So after I left Chicago, we moved to California around the late 90s. And in that first week, I met 3 different people that said, oh, you're living north of the city. There's a great sit right around the corner from you. 3 different people. And I said, okay, great. I'm just going to check it out. I had meditated, but I'd never studied Vipassana. And it was life-changing. And I went to Spirit Rock every weekend. It was just an embarrassment of riches of just all the great teachers now that 20 years later, we read their books and we see them talk and it's no big deal. But back then it was amazing that they were all right around the corner from me. And so one of those teachers, Eugene Cash, said this one time. He just sort of said it offhand. He said, yesterday is as gone as 10 years ago. And it really blew me away. Yesterday is as gone as 10 years ago. So that could be good news, or it could not be good news if you're trying to hold on to something good. If you're trying to break up with your past, it might make it easier. So that has really guided me through a lot of my practice of just kind of going between really trying to get something and grasp something to just really easily letting it go. And so tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about how when we are overly affected by our past, there is no way that we can be present in the moment. We cannot embody the present. So we're going to look at how the Buddha explained how he experienced life and memory and perception. And we're going to do a few mindfulness exercises to help us change our relationship with it. And hopefully we'll learn how to be more happy now by learning how to let that past go. So Denzar Khyentse Rinpoche says this in the opening, The Injured Heart. The past is important, but not as important as the present and the future. The past has already been lived. It doesn't have to be relived. To sacrifice the present and the future by reliving past injuries is not the way of the sages. So whether or not we would consider ourselves sages, it sounds good to me to try that. And finally, do not rob the present of the sacredness of your attention. Do not rob the present of the sacredness of your attention. So what makes our attention sacred? Well, just like in the meditation, our breath is sacred. Our breath keeps us alive, and there's nothing we need to do that. So why does it feel like directing our attention from now as opposed to being, sort of subverted by the past? Why does that happen? So we're going to look at what the Buddha says about why that happens. And when I moved here just about 10 years ago and started going to Whitehall Meditation and studying with Bob Hodge, he was very into studying the 5 aggregates, which is not something I really heard in my years at Spirit Rock. It was just not, there's many different ways to get to the same point. But the 5 aggregates, I never really got it, which is basically 5 ways that we experience anything in life. And so it's not important to really memorize these or know the order. But what's helpful is just to know that they exist and that 2,600 years ago, the Buddha pointed this out, and it never ceases to amaze me how helpful it can be in really seeing what's going on and what's preventing us from embodying the present moment. And so the 5 aggregates, which are they call baskets, is sort of 5 ways that we experience life: form, feelings, perception, mind formations, and consciousness. And so I'm briefly going to touch on them. And as I said, it's not something that you have to memorize, but just knowing that our memories, this is how our memories are formed, and this is how we experience every moment. So how we first perceive anything is there's a form, there's body, rupa. So we see an apple and our eyes are seeing. So a sensation is happening. So we're seeing a form. And whether it's hearing or smelling or tasting, same thing, the 5 senses. But we wouldn't know that it's an apple unless we had a memory of what an apple is. If we saw something that we couldn't identify, we wouldn't know if it was good or bad, if it was dangerous, if it was, something that could hurt us or harm us. So the first thing that happens is we experience form. And then a feeling happens, not an emotion, but a feeling tone. So pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. I see an apple. Oh, I have a memory of an apple being good. That's a pleasant feeling. What does pleasantness feel like? I don't feel tense. I don't feel scared. But if when I was a kid, I bit into an apple and there was a worm in it, I might have a totally different feeling tone. Unpleasant. Oh, tightness. Oh, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to get sick? So a feeling tone happens, and then comes into our perception. So a perception happens. So perception is dependent on the memory for identification. If we have no previous memory of what we've originally sensed, we can't identify it, as I said. So the feeling tone arises a mental impression happens, so a perception is made. And then a mental formation happens. So our conditioned emotions, we have an emotion about it, like, oh, apple, good, or rotten apple, bad. And they arise, and we might have a reaction depending on how strong that formation is. And finally, it enters our consciousness. I don't want to eat that apple. I've made a decision. Now, another way to explain this is all of this is happening, and it's not necessarily true. So I know I'm going home to Chicago. I'm being primed and being agitated. I see someone across the street that looks like someone that I don't want to see. All these physiological things are happening. My heart is racing. I start to sweat. I start thinking, oh my God, I don't want to see that person. It's going to cause me pain. That person hurt me or something. And then that person gets closer and we realize it's not them. So what has happened? We've had a whole experience based on our perception that isn't true, yet we've experienced it anyway. So all that getting lost in the memory and lost in how's that going to hurt me, and red flags, all this stuff, that's unnecessary suffering. Yet there's a reason for this. It's part of how we protect ourselves, as we've all heard in many different readings and talks about our negativity bias, our fight or flight. There is a purpose for all of this. But when we're in our daily lives not having to worry about constant threat, we still feel emotionally threatened by this thing in our past. That's gone as 10 years ago. Ajahn Brahm says, someone can only hurt you once, which I love that. He would say that his teacher said, if you would, write your what's hurting you or worrying you on a stick, and you're carrying the stick all the time, just put down the stick. Don't carry the stick. Someone can only hurt you once. So if you're constantly ruminating about this, you're actively participating in it. And, not to say we don't want to judge ourselves. We don't want to say, oh, I can't believe I'm still thinking of this. It's a different way of experiencing it each time, saying, being no judging, gentleness. Okay, this is coming up for me. It's arising. I know what arises will eventually fall away. But how can I not suffer because something is arising that I can't control? I can't control that, I go to 294 to Chicago and I start feeling like this. But if I really pay attention and I also use my intention, use my determination, all the things in the Eightfold Path that we're taught, there's a way to refocus without gripping. So there's often a question that can come up when we talk about the five aggregates about, okay, so if we see something, we get a feeling tone, we have a perception, we make a decision, it comes in our consciousness. If that's always changing, who is it that is experiencing this? Because there's plenty of times that I can see an apple and I'm just kind of neutral. It doesn't have to be a big thing. So why does it happen sometimes and not the others? There's a lot of other things at work that we can be open to and just sort of say, okay, there's a different way of seeing this. May I be open and a little looser with it? Because I know if I'm not, I know what the end result is. I'm unhappy and I make all those around me unhappy. The Buddha said, if you want to know the past, look at your present. If you want to know the future, look at your present. So the presence doesn't mean we forget the past or not care about the future, but we know that the power of the present is how we are perceiving this whole thing. So the 5 aggregates happen lightning fast. They're not really even in order, but just knowing that they're there when we're in a quiet meditation, that's our opportunity to then say, okay, let's back up here. You know, why do I feel that way when I go to that certain spot? You know, what's going on here? And to use some self-care and self-knowledge that, okay, now is a safe time to investigate this. So this is where memory comes in. So if I'm like remembering all these things and then I go to the actual spot where they happen and it really hurts me and makes me suffer, well, of course, we can just not go there anymore. We can just try to push it out of our mind. But we can also know what recent research says about memory and how memories are formed and how unreliable memories are and how unreliable witnesses are because of memory. So this is from the Harvard Bach Center. And this is how they say memory works. So science is showing that memory operates according to a dual process. There's unconscious routine thoughts that interact with more conscious problem-solving thoughts. Unconscious, gosh, I'm uncomfortable going there. I don't quite know why. I need to solve this problem. I need to not be there. Well, that's a short-term solution. But when we're encoding a memory, we get information in, we store it, and then we retrieve it. But here's the thing about the retrieving. This is what they say at Harvard. Many people believe that human memory works like a video recorder. The mind records events and then on cue plays back an exact replica of them. On the contrary, psychologists have found that memories are reconstructed rather than played back, and they're reconstructed each time we recall them. So someone gave this great analogy at Whitehall Meditation once. They said, well, this research says, or this is one analogy. It's not like we have a memory in a PO box. Like think of like a mailboxes, et cetera, with all the different PO boxes. So the memory's not just in one box that you have one key to. A memory is broken up and different parts of the same memory are in all different PO boxes. And you have to get a key to each of them to reconstruct that memory. And then when you finally reconstruct that memory, it actually is stored in a different part of your brain now. Now you need a new key. You need a new PO box. And then it gets filed away differently each time. So this sounds a little crazy because, how can we rely on anything? There's things we have to remember correctly. We go to school to remember things. We have to drive safely. We have to remember, don't do this. This hurts someone, or don't eat that. That makes you sick. But when we talk about emotions, none of these bad feelings I had were life-threatening so much. I mean, I did get mugged. I did get my car, stolen. But what's making me unhappy now about something that happened 20 years ago? It's the memory. It's how I'm interacting now with that memory. And I'm sure we've all had that experience of someone reminding you of something that you have no recall over. I'm from a family of 5 kids, and there's 5 different versions of every event in the family. I know mine is right. So I wanted to do a little exercise, and this is to help just sort of experience a certain memory. So I invite you, if you choose, to close your eyes and just, if I said, pick something from your past, not a big thing, but just something that's kind of annoying, like chronically, and just realize that you're not in it now. You're in a safe place. Breathe. Just think of something that prevents you from being happy right now. So when we're caught in a memory, we can ask ourselves the following things. What's true right now? What's true right now? How does this feel in my body and mind? Can you name the sensations? Noticing the physical and emotional tensions that are arising, recognizing if there is contraction or suffering. And as you name these sensations, I want you to remember 3 words: embodied, present, and kind. Dropping into your body, bringing your attention to where you are right now, embodied, present, and kind. How is your mind reacting to what's happening now? Are you creating a fantasy of a different outcome? Is there aversion? Is there fear? Dropping into your body, embodied, present, kind. And finally, we can ask, what Dharma can I find around this difficult memory in this moment? Is there some teaching I can relate this to? The Four Noble Truths, the hindrances. And finally, who is it that is having this experience? Who is it? We may say, I am. But the I am you are now is different than the I am of 5 minutes ago. Embodied, present, and kind. So when you choose, you can open your eyes. So who is it that is having these experiences? Not to go off on some tangent about self and no self. That's a different talk. But I think we could all agree that when we focus our awareness on this, there is a consciousness that is consistent. And it's not like it is, the borders of it are our skin or body, but there's a consciousness, and we've made an effort to be here, to understand it. And consciousness isn't some stable entity. It's constantly dissolving and reforming. So when we're caught in a really hard memory, instead of trying to solve it, for me, I know sometimes the kindest thing to do is to just give up the desire to understand it. Instead of trying to figure it out, why did I do that? My life would be so different. But just knowing that there is a dignity in your intention, that not having to solve everything, but to be present is sometimes the strongest thing you can do. So Pema Chodron says, every moment we experience something new. Every moment we have a sense of self, having that experience. There's the smell of toast. I am the smeller of toast. When this moment passes, it's immediately followed by another moment with a subject and an object, just like our first aggregate. This flow of dualistic experience continues uninterruptedly through our waking hours and our dreams, through this life and across lifetimes. Beyond this flow of moments, is there anything underlying them that we can point to as even consciousness? We cannot locate or describe any stable element that lives through all of our experiences. Something to ponder. But that still can't help you shed that old coat that you're trying to shed if you want to. So when I was back home, I was visiting my 90-year-old mother, and she's doing fairly well for her age. And she raised 5 kids as a single mom. It was pretty difficult, but we're all still living. We're okay. So I was at the kitchen table trying to change her passwords, as I do when I always come, and I'm trying to think of, capital, something she can remember yet secure, and very involved. And I look over her and she's just crying. And I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, I just wish I could have given you girls a better childhood. She was destroyed. And I said, Mom, I'm just trying to change your passwords. And she's very lost in her narrative. And I saw at that moment that in addition to giving up the need to know why things happen, it helps to be willing to let go of your story and how much the past has to do with your identity. It's very secure to know you got through something, you were strong, it's inspiring to people, but it's preventing the presence of right now. And I've often told her when she sort of gets lost in this, I'll say, I want to enjoy with you right now, I want to just sit here and enjoy and just the moment. Thinking of something light or, not something that happened decades and decades ago. It doesn't serve anybody. So giving up the need to figure everything out and giving up the need to have a consistent story, which was certainly my, experience going back to a physical place. But as Rick Hansen says, he thinks the key to a lot of this is to, we want to be open to hard feelings, open to things that are uncomfortable, but we want to be open to all the good and really imprint it in ourselves. To really just anytime there is a moment of release, of fun, replace the trauma bond with a fun bond. And I told that to my mom. I said, we're so trauma bonded, this family, we want to have some fun, you know. So we danced all night at the wedding, and that was a great new memory, all ages really made an effort to do that, not get lost in the past suffering. So finally, I wanted to do it's not quite an exercise. It's just something that I often have used in my life. And so I think most of you are aware of the story of the Buddha's, the night of the day of the Buddha's enlightenment. But as it's always a nice, there's so many different versions of it. I'm going to read one. And I call this hand on the ground exercise. So the story goes that the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, and he decided he was not going to get up until he was enlightened. He lived the life of a prince. It didn't make him content. He lived the life of an ascetic, eating 1 grain of rice per day for years. That didn't work. And so he said the middle way was the thing to try. So we sat under the Bodhi tree, and we've often seen the statues. Let's see, is this one? No, this one's not doing it. But there's the statue of the Buddha when he's touching the earth with his right hand. And the story goes that when the Buddha was meditating under the Bodhi tree, Mara tried to lead him into temptation. And Mara is sometimes called the Lord of Death. He represents desires and the things that we hold on to that might be hindering us from obtaining enlightenment ourselves. So Mara tried to tempt the Buddha out of his meditative state many times. He sent messengers with the news that rivals had seized the throne of the Buddha's family, but this didn't work. So Mara sent storms of rains and rocks and ashes and darkness. Didn't work. Next, he sent 3 daughters that represented thirst, desire, and delight to seduce the Buddha, and it didn't work. And so lastly, Mara challenged him, saying that the seat of enlightenment only rightfully belonged to Mara, and that he should be taking the Buddha's spot under the Bodhi tree. And to this, Mara's even had demon soldiers that said, we are his witness. Mara deserves this. We're the witness. And Mara turned to the Buddha and said, who will speak for you? And in that moment, while sitting in his posture of meditation, the Buddha reached out to touched the earth with his right hand, and he summoned the earth goddess and to bear him witness. The earth spoke, roared with its response, I bear you witness. And then Mara heard this and he disappeared. So the Buddha said that it makes no difference what you grasp, but when you grasp, Mara stands beside you. So that's pretty heavy. But I often, when I really feel like I'm kind of just spinning, I touch the ground. I touch something solid with my right hand and take a breath. The Buddha said we're all Buddhas. We all have Buddha nature. It's all possible. And depending on what type of meditation you study, you're already enlightened, though it may not feel like it sometimes. But again, just knowing that it's possible, just that other living beings have attained it, and so can you. And so we find the middle way, the balance of effort, but yet not effort, of reaching the shore without ever having left, simply by inclining our focus and our desire for love, not hate, for peace, not war. So I think that's where I'll leave you tonight with my story about the past, and hopefully a better present, a more embodied present. So I'd love to know if anybody has any comments or questions.
I can just say it was interesting watching when I touched into a family story. A great one came up about my troublesome brothers. And it was all story. It was all in my head. But when I touched into it in the moment, there was a lot of feeling, a little reflection, a recognizing impermanence of the brother who's not there anymore. It was so much richer to touch into it from the present.
Thanks, Mary Louise. I only have one child, and so I wonder, she's not going to have any of these stories, all of her problem siblings, because I often think, who would I be without my siblings? My twin and I are the youngest of 5, and so much of our upbringing was, I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be like those older girls. They're just constantly getting into trouble. Looking back, they probably had a lot of fun. But it caused our mom a lot of distress. So we wanted the opposite. Yet being in the opposite may not be our true nature. And we can say that there's no permanent self, or that we're just a flow of consciousness, but we are each our own beings, very unique, with a voice and a way to experience life and a role to play in our communities and our families. And I can certainly speak for myself that I feel like if I don't identify my desire, which is a good desire, to experience these relationships with more, with less stress, there seems to be like a fever pitch of emotions that will just instantly come up, that will be quite an opportunity to use the practice. I think that's we may not choose our families, but it really can be such an opportunity if we choose it to be. I a few years ago, so there's a monk, and he's been a guest at Tara Brach's Sangha, Anam Tubten Rinpoche. He wrote several books, one of which is called No Self, No Problem, which is a really very easy, thin book. And so I took a retreat with him, and I remember sitting there. I knew I signed up for an interview at the end of the day, and I was like really trying to craft like the perfect question to come off like I was so great, or so like, deep or whatever. And it was terrible, because you're not in the moment when you're just trying to think, oh, I really don't want to embarrass myself. I have this opportunity with this great, teacher. And so to this day, I can't even remember what I said, but I remember his answer, which was, he looked me in the eye and he said, what if you were already enlightened? And then he goes, because you are. And I believed it. I believed it there for a few minutes, because it's like until you're told that that's possible, you don't even think it's an option. And I've had teachers that say, well, enlightenment is just every moment on the cushion. I've had other teachers say, you got to build all this merit and all this other stuff. But then, you go to Pure Land and it's like, you're already there. You are already there. You just have to wake up. We're all already there. It could be that easy. Reach the shore without ever having left. But Bhante G is, he writes really, really easy to understand books about we all have Buddha nature. We all we can't. I mean, it's usually then someone will say, come up with an example. They want to prove you wrong. Like, well, what about fill in the terrible name from history. There's causes and conditions for everything. No one is born that way. So we may only be able to affect our small little circle. That's all we really can do. But it's powerful if even one person in a family is saying, I am not going to take the bait down this road of suffering. Well, I hope you all have a good night. Thank you so much.